My wife's funeral had just taken place a few days ago, and her sons were already sitting in my living room with inheritance papers. I stared at the documents. Every property, every account, every asset that my wife and I had built together, they were claiming it all. My lawyer pulled me aside. "This is unconscionable. Fight back. You'll win." "No," I said quietly. "Prepare whatever they need. I'll sign everything." People whispered that grief had shattered me, that I had surrendered without even trying. At the courthouse hearing, I signed every document they placed before me. They practically glowed with victory. Then their attorney's hand froze mid-page. His face drained of color as he read what they had actually inherited. "Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here with me today. It truly means more than you know. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. I always read them, and it amazes me how far these stories travel across the world. Also, a gentle note. Parts of this story have been thoughtfully dramatized for storytelling and educational purposes. Any similarities to actual people or places are purely coincidental, but the lesson behind it is meant to stay with you. The scent of Lorraine's perfume still lingered in her office chair, a floral, comforting fragrance that had welcomed me each evening when I'd discover her nestled here with a book beneath the lamplight. It had been 3 days since we laid her to rest. Yet I found myself drawn to this spot, unable to settle anywhere else in the house. Morning sunlight streamed through the expansive bay windows, creating elongated shadows across the polished mahogany desk, and catching particles of dust that floated like fragments of memories just beyond my reach. Their arrival announced itself through sound before sight. The sharp tap of Clayton's costly leather shoes echoed against the hardwood of our Beacon Hill brownstone, though calling it ours felt increasingly empty. Behind him came Vanessa's softer footfalls, measured and cautious, as though she understood the delicacy of what lay ahead. They materialized in the doorway as a unified force. Clayton had chosen a suit unfamiliar to me, dove gray, likely Italian craftsmanship, unmistakably recent. It was the sort of attire worn by someone projecting success, or perhaps concealing its absence. Vanessa gripped an expensive handbag defensively against her body, her fingers bloodless where they clutched the leather. Neither could bring themselves to meet my gaze. Benjamin. The way Clayton spoke my name carried the calculated neutrality I'd observed in his legal presentations, controlled, businesslike, stripped of any emotional warmth. Gone was the dad he'd used at the funeral merely 3 days earlier when appearances mattered. Now it was simply Benjamin. There are practical matters we must address." Vanessa interjected, her smile as fragile and cold as thin ice. She positioned herself tentatively on Lorraine's beloved reading chair, near the window, the very spot where my wife had spent countless mornings observing our neighborhood spring to life. I managed a nod, words escaping me entirely. What response could possibly suffice? The woman who had been my everything for 22 years was gone, and the children I'd worked so hard to embrace as my own had arrived to handle practical matters before the reality of her absence had fully taken hold. With the practiced efficiency of someone conducting routine business, Clayton extracted a folder from his polished leather briefcase. He saw no need for gentle introductions. "We need to address the estate settlement. Mom's holdings, the real estate, her business investments. These all have legal frameworks demanding prompt resolution." He spread documentation across Lorraine's workspace, each sheet feeling like a small desecration of her memory. Some bore her distinctive handwriting, those elegant curves and flourishes that once adorned love notes left on our bathroom mirror. Our Boston residence. Clayton began, his finger indicating a property valuation document. Assessed at $2.1 million. The Big Sur property, $2.65 million. Then there's Donovan Construction, your creation naturally, though Mom maintained co-ownership, valued at $1.1 million. Every figure struck like a weight, dropping into calm water, creating expanding circles of disturbance in my chest. "These holdings?" he went on, and I registered how carefully he avoided phrases like "your holdings" or "family assets." merely these holdings, reducing them to impersonal investments, rather than acknowledging the home where Lorraine and I had marked 22 anniversaries, the coastal villa where we'd reaffirmed our vows above the Pacific, the company bearing my name and representing my life's dedication. Based on the will. Vanessa inserted her tone, carrying a practiced softness that turned my stomach. These properties transfer to Clayton and me. Mom left very specific instructions regarding her wishes. I raised my eyes, then examining both their expressions. Clayton's features remained rigid, his gray eyes inheriting their color from his mother, but none of her tenderness focusing somewhere past my left ear. Vanessa at least appeared somewhat uneasy, though whether from genuine remorse or simple discomfort remained unclear. And what about me? The question emerged quietly. My own voice sounded foreign, as if originating from someone more aged and broken than I felt internally. Clayton's demeanor remained unchanged. Of course, there's the life insurance benefit, $450,000. That amount should adequately cover your future requirements. Adequately cover my requirements. As though 2 decades of marriage, of true partnership, of building a shared existence could be reduced to a satisfactory sum and dismissed with a single insurance distribution. My thoughts drifted to Lorraine during those closing weeks, when illness had drained her physical strength while leaving her spirit intact. She'd clasped my hand from her hospital bed, her grasp unexpectedly strong despite her condition. "I've arranged everything," she'd murmured, her voice roughened by medication. "You won't need to worry about anything." Had she understood? Had she foreseen her children's intentions? Naturally, there remained some unpaid medical costs. Clayton continued referencing another document. Mom's experimental treatments, the hospice services. Insurance handled the majority, but roughly $425,000 remains outstanding. The figure struck me with physical force. 450,000 reduced by 425,000. $25,000. Apparently, this was the monetary value assigned to 22 years of marriage in their accounting. Vanessa shifted forward, arranging her features into what she likely believed conveyed sympathy. "We recognize this is challenging, Benjamin. However, Mom always meant for family assets to remain with blood relatives. Surely you can appreciate that this isn't meant to hurt you." "Not meant to hurt me." The phrase reverberated in the room's sudden stillness. Not meant to hurt that they were claiming everything. Not meant to hurt that they'd timed this conversation for exactly 3 days following their mother's burial. Not meant to hurt that they occupied her sanctuary surrounded by her literature and photographs and the life we'd created together, informing me of my displacement from my own reality. I offered no response. What words existed? Should I explain how I'd cherished their mother beyond life itself, that I'd accompanied her to every chemotherapy appointment while they dispatched flowers and manufactured excuses about conflicting schedules, that across 22 years, I'd never given her cause to feel anything less than treasured? Clayton rose, apparently interpreting my silence as acceptance. "We're not without compassion," he stated, though his tone suggested quite the opposite. "We're providing 30 days for you to organize alternative arrangements. We believe that's exceptionally generous." Generous. Yet another word drained of its meaning. "Our legal representatives will contact you," Vanessa added, already advancing toward the exit, anxious to escape the gravity of their actions. "Gerald Pemberton will manage the documentation. He'll ensure this proceeds as smoothly as possible." They departed, leaving me alone in Lorraine's chair, encircled by the remnants of a life apparently no longer mine. Through the window, I observed them entering Clayton's BMW, another fresh purchase, I noted. They never glanced back toward the house. Why would they, in their minds, ownership had already transferred? The morning sun had progressed, altering how light illuminated the desk, and revealing something previously hidden, the edge of an envelope protruding from beneath Lorraine's desk pad, my name written in her distinctive script, and beside it the corner of a small brass key. My hand shook as I extended it toward these items. The words hung in the air between us, $25,000, and I watched Clayton's face for any flicker of recognition, any acknowledgement that what he'd just said was absurd. But his expression remained unchanged, professional, as if he'd just quoted the price of a used sedan rather than the sum total of my future. He cleared his throat, a small sound that somehow felt rehearsed. "I know this seems complicated, Benjamin, but you have to understand, Mom was very deliberate in her planning. She worked with her attorneys for months to ensure everything was structured properly." Structured properly, I repeated, tasting the words. They felt foreign in my mouth, corporate jargon applied to the dissolution of a marriage, a life, a family. "It's not personal," Clayton continued, and something in his tone shifted, became almost gentle, as if he were explaining something to a child who couldn't quite grasp basic mathematics. "Mom always intended for the family assets to stay within the bloodline. She was very clear about that. These properties, the business, they've been in the family for generations, in a sense. It's about legacy, about keeping things where they belong." Bloodline. The word landed differently than the numbers had. The numbers had been abstract, shocking in their magnitude, but somehow distant. This was intimate. This was personal, despite what Clayton claimed. 22 years of marriage and I wasn't part of the bloodline. 22 years of birthday parties and Christmas mornings and quiet Sunday breakfasts. 22 years of holding Lorraine when she cried about her father's death, of celebrating when Clayton made partner at his firm, of helping Vanessa move into her first office space. 22 years of being called Dad at family gatherings, of signing cards as "Love, Mom and Dad," of believing I belonged. But I wasn't blood, and apparently that was all that mattered in the end. I glanced past Clayton toward the doorway and noticed for the first time that we weren't alone. Bethany stood just beyond the threshold, Clayton's wife of 7 years, watching our exchange with an expression I couldn't quite read. Her eyes moved slowly across the room, taking in the built-in bookshelves Lorraine had commissioned, the vintage Persian rug we'd found at an estate sale in Cambridge, the Steinway piano in the corner that neither of us played, but that Lorraine had insisted made the house feel alive. Bethany's gaze was calculating, cataloging, already measuring curtains in her mind perhaps, already planning which furniture would stay and which would go. She caught me looking and had the grace to glance away, but not before I saw something flicker across her face. Not guilt exactly, more like the expression of someone who just won a bet they'd placed months ago. "Of course we understand this is difficult," Vanessa said, her voice pulling my attention back. She'd moved closer, perching now on the arm of Lorraine's favorite reading chair, a liberty that felt like a violation, though I couldn't articulate why. Losing a parent. She paused, seemed to catch herself, then pushed forward. "Losing a spouse is one of life's hardest challenges, but Mom would want us to handle this as a family. She'd want the people she loved to have what belongs to them." The people she loved. As if I were somehow separate from that category. As if 22 years of devotion had been a pleasant interlude, rather than the central fact of both our lives. "When Lorraine was in the hospital," I said quietly, surprised by my own voice. "Those last few weeks she mentioned something about papers, personal documents she'd been organizing. She said she'd put everything in order that I'd understand when the time came." The change in the room was immediate. Vanessa's smile froze, became somehow more rigid. Clayton's eyes sharpened, and he exchanged a glance with his sister that lasted less than a second, but spoke volumes. "What kind of papers?" Clayton asked, his tone carefully neutral. She didn't specify, just said she'd taken care of everything, made sure all the details were handled. I watched them both carefully as I spoke. I assumed she meant the medical directives, the funeral arrangements, but now I wonder if she meant something else. Another glance between the siblings, quicker this time. Vanessa shifted her weight, and I heard the leather of the chair creak softly. Mom was very thorough, Clayton said finally. I'm sure whatever papers you're thinking of are included in the estate documents. Gerald will have everything. There's no need for you to worry about tracking down old files or correspondence. But there was something in the way he said it too quickly, too smoothly, that made my instincts prickle. After 40 years in construction, I'd learned to recognize when someone was trying to sell me something I didn't need or talk me out of something I did. Of course, I said, keeping my voice even. I'm sure you're right. Clayton stood, then brushing invisible lint from his expensive trousers, a gesture I'd seen him make countless times when he was ready to end a conversation on his terms. Our attorneys will be in touch within the next few days. Gerald Pemberton, you remember him from the estate planning meetings. He'll handle all the paperwork. Very efficient, very professional. He'll make this whole process as painless as possible. Painless, as if pain were something that could be managed with the right legal documents and a firm handshake. Vanessa rose as well, already gathering her handbag, already mentally out the door. We really are sorry, Benjamin, for your loss, for all of this. She gestured vaguely at the room, at the situation, at the wreckage of what had been just days ago my life. We'll give you space to process everything. They moved toward the door in unison, Clayton's hand, finding the small of Vanessa's back, in a gesture that was probably meant to be comforting, but looked more like hurting. Bethany stepped aside to let them pass, then followed without a word, without a backward glance. I listened to their footsteps receding down the hallway, heard the heavy front door open and close with its familiar solid thunk. Through the window, I watched Clayton's BMW pull away from the curb, watched it disappear around the corner onto Charles Street. The house settled into silence around me. The old brownstone had its own sounds, the tick of the radiator, the whisper of wind through the eaves, the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Sounds I'd lived with for 2 decades, sounds that were apparently no longer mine to hear. I sat alone in Lorraine's chair in Lorraine's office, in what would soon be someone else's house, and let the weight of that single word settle over me like snow. Bloodline. I wasn't part of it. I had never been part of it. And 22 years of love had not been enough to change that fundamental fact. They left at dusk. I watched from the living room window as Clayton's Lexus pulled away, Vanessa in the passenger seat, both of them silent. The taillights disappeared around the corner, and I was alone. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt hollowed out. The house was too quiet. Not the peaceful quiet I'd grown accustomed to in the weeks after Lorraine's death, but something heavier, accusatory, as if the walls themselves were asking me what I was going to do now. I wandered through the rooms, touching things: Lorraine's favorite chair by the window, the bookshelf she'd organized by color instead of author, the kitchen table where we'd eaten breakfast together for 22 years. Everything felt fragile, temporary, as if it might vanish the moment I looked away. Clayton's words kept circling back. $25,000. The life insurance he'd said was already spoken for. The house would need to be sold to settle debts I'd never heard of. Lorraine's estate, according to him, was a carefully managed disaster, and I was the last to know. But something didn't sit right. Lorraine had been deliberate about everything: her coffee routine, her garden beds, the way she folded laundry. She wouldn't have left chaos behind. Not intentionally. I found myself standing in her office, a small room off the hallway, that she'd claimed as her own years ago. The desk was still covered with her things: a stack of unopened mail, a coffee mug with lipstick stains, a framed photo of the two of us on our wedding day. I sat down in her chair, the leather creaking under my weight. The desk drawers were locked, but I knew where she kept the key, taped to the underside of the top drawer, a trick she'd learned from her mother. I pulled it free and unlocked the first drawer. Inside were files. Lots of them. Tax returns, bank statements, insurance documents, all neatly labeled and organized. I flipped through them, slowly looking for anything unusual. Then I found it. A manila envelope tucked beneath a stack of old utility bills. It was sealed, and on the front, in Lorraine's handwriting, were 3 words, "When you're ready." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of a bank statement I didn't recognize. The account number was partially redacted, but the balance wasn't $127,483.12. And beneath it, a handwritten note, "Benjamin. This is just the beginning. Keep looking. Trust no one but Gerald. And remember, I always protected what mattered most. L." I stared at the note for a long time, my heart pounding in my chest. There was more. There had to be. I searched the rest of the drawers, pulling out files, receipts, old letters. In the back of the bottom drawer, I found a small brass key attached to a red ribbon. No label, no explanation. But it was deliberate. Lorraine didn't leave things lying around by accident. I slipped the key into my pocket and kept searching. In her wallet, tucked in the back of a desk organizer, I found something else, a bank card I'd never seen before. On the back, in faded blue ink, was a 10-digit number written in Lorraine's hand. Not a phone number, not an account number I recognized. But it meant something. I sat back in the chair, the pieces scattered around me like a puzzle I didn't yet know how to solve. Clayton and Vanessa had come here with documents, with legal language, with the confidence of people who believed they knew everything. But Lorraine had left breadcrumbs, and I was going to follow them. I called Gerald Pemberton the next morning. He answered on the second ring, his voice cautious. "Benjamin, how are you holding up?" "I need to ask you something," I said, skipping the pleasantries. Did Lorraine ever mention setting up accounts I didn't know about, trusts, maybe separate bank accounts? There was a pause. Then, "Why do you ask?" "Because I found a bank statement in her desk, an account I've never seen, and a key I don't recognize." Gerald was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was careful. "Benjamin, I think you should come to my office. There are things we need to discuss in person." "What things?" "Things Lorraine may have put in place without telling anyone, including me." My grip tightened on the phone. "When?" "This afternoon, 2 o'clock. And Benjamin, bring everything you found. Don't mention this to Clayton or Vanessa. Not yet." I hung up and stared at the brass key in my hand. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second louder than the last. Outside, the radiator hissed as it kicked on, and somewhere in the kitchen the refrigerator hummed its familiar tune. But this time the sounds didn't feel like ghosts. They felt like a countdown. Tomorrow I would go to Gerald's office. Tomorrow I would start asking the questions Lorraine had left unanswered. And tomorrow I would find out exactly what my wife had been protecting me from. Morning traffic on I-93 was lighter than expected for a Tuesday. I'd left early, unable to sleep, the brass key on my nightstand, catching first light like a small accusation. Now navigating through the financial district, the city felt sharper, more real than it had in days. Gerald Pemberton's office occupied the 15th floor of a glass tower on Federal Street. I'd been here once before, years ago, when Lorraine and I updated our wills. Back then, it felt like a formality. Now, waiting for the elevator in the marble lobby, it felt like walking into an examination I hadn't studied for. The elevator climbed smoothly. A young woman beside me thumbed through emails on her phone, absorbed in ordinary concerns like meetings and deadlines. I envied that, the ability to worry about normal things rather than brass keys and bloodlines. Gerald's receptionist recognized me. "Mr. Donovan, he's expecting you. Go right in." His office overlooked Boston Harbor, water gray blue under morning clouds. Ships moved slowly across the channel, their purpose clear, destinations mapped. I envied their certainty. "Benjamin, fastidio." Gerald stood from behind an expensive desk, 50-ish, carefully groomed, accepting his receding hairline with grace. But his usual composure was cracked, replaced by genuine concern. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." I took the leather chair across from him. Through the window behind Gerald, I could see Logan Airport in the distance, planes taking off in orderly patterns. "I'll get straight to it," Gerald said, folding his hands. "I've been reviewing the estate documents Clayton sent, and Benjamin, something isn't right. This will doesn't track with what I know about Lorraine's intentions." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "I mean you have grounds to contest this. Strong grounds." He pulled out a file, laid papers across the desk with careful precision. "Under Massachusetts law, a surviving spouse is entitled to protections. This will essentially disinherit you while you were clearly married and cohabitating. It raises serious red flags." Legal language blurred together, whereas and heretofore and notwithstanding. "A contest would take time," Gerald continued. 6 months minimum, could stretch to a year. Legal fees, 50,000–60,000, maybe more if Clayton fights hard. Which he will. He paused. "But Benjamin, you'd have a real chance. Why would Lorraine write me out like this if she loved me?" Gerald's expression softened. "That's exactly my point. I knew Lorraine saw how she talked about you at firm holiday parties, how she looked at you. This will doesn't sound like her." He chose his words carefully. "It reads like someone else wrote it and she signed. Or like there's another will somewhere that supersedes this one." The brass key burned against my thigh through my pocket. Before I could respond, Gerald's phone rang. He glanced at caller ID, jaw tightening. "It's Clayton." "Answer it," I said. He pressed speaker. "Clayton." "Gerald, good morning." Clayton's voice filled the office, smooth as expensive scotch. "Just checking the timeline. Has Benjamin signed the transfer documents? We'd really like to move forward quickly. Better for everyone involved." Gerald's eyes stayed on mine. "I'm meeting with Benjamin now, discussing his options." A pause, brief but telling. "His options, Gerald, the will is clear. We just need signatures." "Clayton, I think there are questions about—" "Questions." Clayton's voice sharpened. "What kind of questions?" "Mom's wishes were explicit. She worked with your firm 15 years. Are you suggesting problems with documents you prepared?" "I'm suggesting," Gerald said, voice cooling, "that Benjamin deserves time to fully understand his legal position before making irreversible decisions." Another pause, longer. I could almost hear Clayton recalculating. "Of course," he said, finally, smoothness returning. "Benjamin should take all the time he needs. We're not rushing anyone. It's just these things drag on without proper attention to paperwork. Mom wouldn't have wanted that." "I'll call you back, Clayton." Gerald disconnected without waiting for response. Heavy silence. Gerald leaned back, studying me with lawyer's eyes. He's worried. People confident in their position don't push that hard that fast. I thought about Clayton and Vanessa's exchanged glances when I mentioned Lorraine's papers. Vanessa dropping her wine glass. Bethany's calculating look surveying the house. People hiding something. "Gerald," I said slowly, "if I wanted to just let this go, give them everything without a fight, how quickly could that happen?" Shock crossed his face. "Benjamin, you can't be serious." "How quickly?" "Days. A week at most. But why would you even consider?" "What if fighting would destroy me even if I won?" I interrupted carefully. "What if the cost, not just money, but time, energy, what it would do to my relationship with Lorraine's children? What if that was too high?" Gerald leaned forward, pleading now. Benjamin, in 30 years of practice, I've never advised a client to walk away from a 7-figure inheritance without a fight. There has to be more to this. Something you're not telling me. The brass key. The envelope. When you're ready. Lorraine's hand in the hospital. I've taken care of everything. But I wasn't ready to share those things. Not until I understood what they meant. I'm tired, Geraldine, I said, and it wasn't entirely a lie. Tired of being the outsider trying to claim a place in a family that never wanted me there. Maybe it's easier to let go, let them have what they think they deserve, and build something new. Gerald stared for a long moment, lawyer's brain working through possibilities, trying to find the angle I wasn't showing. Finally, he sighed. If that's what you want, I'll draw up papers. But Benjamin, please, sleep on this. Don't make final decisions when you're raw from grief. I stood, extended my hand. Thank you, Gerald, for caring enough to question this. He shook it firmly, expression still troubled. If you change your mind, I know where to find you. In the elevator going down, I touched the brass keys outline through my pocket. Gerald was right about one thing. There was more to this story. Much more. And somewhere Lorraine had left me the clues to find it. I just had to figure out what lock this key opened. Gerald's office was in a brick building near Copley Square, the kind of place that smelled like old paper and furniture polish. I'd been here before years ago when Lorraine and I had drawn up our wills. Back then, it had felt routine. Now it felt like walking into enemy territory. Gerald met me at the door, his handshake firm, his expression guarded. He gestured toward a conference room, and I followed him inside. The brass key and the bank card were in my jacket pocket. I could feel their weight with every step. We sat across from each other, a polished mahogany table between us. Gerald folded his hands and waited. I took out the key and the card and placed them on the table. Lorraine left these, I said, along with a bank statement for an account I've never heard of. I need to know what they're for. Gerald picked up the key, turning it over in his fingers. This looks like a safety deposit box key. Do you know which bank? I think it might be First National, on Newberry Street. That's where the card is from. He nodded slowly. And you haven't been there yet? Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Gerald set the key down and leaned back in his chair. Benjamin, I'm going to be very direct with you. If Lorraine set up accounts or assets you didn't know about, she did it for a reason. And if Clayton and Vanessa don't know about them, that's also deliberate. What are you saying? I'm saying your wife may have been protecting you from them. The words hung between us. Why would she need to? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Because she didn't trust them, Gerald said simply. And neither should you. I thought about the conversation 3 days ago. Clayton's smooth explanations, Vanessa's sympathetic nods, the way they'd handed me documents, as if I were a child who needed guidance. They said the estate is a mess, I said. That Lorraine left debts, that the life insurance is already allocated. Gerald's jaw tightened. Did they show you documentation? Some, not everything. Benjamin listened to me carefully. If Lorraine suspected that her sons might try to control the estate after her death, she would have taken steps. Legal steps. She was a smart woman. She wouldn't have left you vulnerable. So what do I do? Gerald leaned forward. First, you go to that bank. Open the safety deposit box. See what's inside. Second, you bring me everything, statements, documents, anything Lorraine left behind. And third, you don't sign anything Clayton or Vanessa put in front of you. Not until I've reviewed it. I nodded, my throat tight. There's something else, Gerald said quietly. If Lorraine moved assets into accounts you didn't know about, That means she may have created a trust or a secondary will, something filed separately. I can check with the probate court, but it'll take time. How much time? A few days, maybe a week. I looked down at the key and the card on the table. Such small things, but they felt like lifelines. Do you think she knew? I asked. That they'd come after me like this? Gerald's expression softened. I think she knew exactly what kind of people they were, and I think she loved you enough to make sure they couldn't take everything. I picked up the key and slipped it back into my pocket. Then I'll go to the bank tomorrow morning, I said. Good. And Benjamin. Gerald's voice stopped me as I stood. Be careful. If there's money involved, people do desperate things. Even family. I nodded and left. Outside, the evening air was crisp, the streetlights flickering on as dusk settled over the city. I walked slowly back toward the parking garage, my mind racing. Lorraine had known. She'd seen this coming. And instead of confronting Clayton and Vanessa, instead of causing a scene, she'd quietly built a wall around me, a fortress made of paperwork and hidden accounts and locked boxes. I thought about the last conversation we'd had 2 days before she died. She'd been weak. Her voice barely a whisper, but she'd gripped my hand and said, "Promise me you'll trust yourself, Benjamin. Don't let anyone tell you who you are." At the time, I'd thought she meant the grief, the loneliness, the inevitable questions about what came next. But now I understood. She'd been preparing me for war. When I got home, the house felt different. Not empty, transformed. I walked through the rooms, slowly seeing them with new eyes. The living room where we'd hosted dinners. The kitchen where Lorraine had taught herself to make sourdough. The bedroom where we'd talked late into the night about nothing and everything. It all looked the same, but it wasn't. It was like visiting a museum dedicated to a life I'd once lived. Beautiful, preserved, but no longer mine to inhabit. Clayton and Vanessa thought they could take it, thought they could reduce 22 years to a dollar amount and a signature line. Thought grief had made me weak, pliable, easy to manipulate. But they were wrong. I pulled the brass key from my pocket and held it up to the dim light filtering through the curtains. It gleamed dull gold, small and unassuming, but I knew better now. This wasn't just a key. It was a weapon, and Lorraine had left it in my hands. Tomorrow I would go to First National Bank. Tomorrow I would open whatever door this key unlocked. And tomorrow everything would change. I stood in the center of the living room, gripping the key, feeling the weight of what was coming. Lorraine had given me the tools. She'd anticipated their greed, their entitlement, their belief that they deserved what she and I had built together. Now it was up to me to use what she'd left behind. Not for revenge, for justice. The phone rang at 9:30 Wednesday morning, just as I was preparing to leave for First National Bank. I stared at the screen. Vanessa Pierce. My chest tightened. After 3 days of silence, now she called. Benjamin. Her voice was soft, almost fragile. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I set down my car keys. No, what is it? I wanted to check in on you, see how you're holding up. There was a pause long enough for me to hear traffic in the background. I know things have been tense, and I'm sorry for that. Really. I said nothing. The brass key sat heavy in my pocket beside the bank card. Clayton and I were talking, she continued, and we both feel terrible about how everything went down. This whole situation, it's not what any of us wanted. Mom wouldn't have wanted us fighting. Mom. The word scraped against something raw inside me. We'd like to have you over for dinner, Vanessa said. Tomorrow night, at Clayton's place in Wellesley. Just family. A chance to sit down together, talk things through. We owe you that much. I walked to the window overlooking the street. A UPS truck idled at the corner. Across the way, Mrs. Higgins swept her front steps like she did every Wednesday. Benjamin, Vanessa's voice, pulled me back. Will you come? Every instinct told me this was a setup, another move in whatever game they were playing. But if I refused, they'd know I suspected something. And I needed time to see what Lorraine had left in that safety deposit box. What time? I asked. 7 o'clock. Clayton's address is... I know where he lives. Oh. Right. Another pause. Thank you, Benjamin. This means a lot. To both of us. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding the phone, staring at my reflection in the dark screen. Lorraine gazed at me from the framed photo on the mantel, the two of us at Big Sur the Pacific, crashing behind us, her head on my shoulder. What are you trying to tell me? I spent the rest of Wednesday researching. Clayton's house was a modern colonial in Wellesley's Dover Estates, a neighborhood where lawns were measured by the acre and property taxes funded small countries. Vanessa had flown in from Atlanta the night before. Her return flight wasn't until Sunday. They wanted me there. Both of them. Together. The bank card sat on my desk beside my laptop. I'd held it under the light a dozen times trying to decode the handwritten number on the back. 10 digits. Not a phone number. Not an account number I recognized. Tomorrow I'd go to First National, but tonight I'd go to Clayton's. If they wanted to talk, I'd listen. If they wanted to pressure me, I'd smile and nod. And all the while, I'd watch. I'd observe. I'd gather every scrap of information I could. Because Lorraine had taught me something over 22 years of marriage, the best way to understand a project was to study its foundation, find the cracks, identify the weak points. And Clayton and Vanessa, they were showing me cracks. Thursday evening, I dressed carefully. Navy tie, the blazer Lorraine had bought me for our last anniversary. I slipped the brass key and bank card into my inner pocket, a talisman against whatever waited in Wellesley. The drive took 30 minutes on Route 9. I watched the neighborhoods shift from Cambridge's brick row houses to Brookline's tree-lined streets, to Wellesley's sprawling estates. Old money gave way to new money. Academic prestige gave way to corporate wealth. Clayton had always belonged to this world. Even as a kid, according to Lorraine, he'd been drawn to status symbols, the right schools, the right clubs, the right car. I turned onto Dover Road. The GPS guided me past stone walls and iron gates, past houses that looked like they'd been airlifted from the Connecticut shore. Clayton's place sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, modern colonial just as I'd seen online, but bigger in person. White clapboard, black shutters, a 3-car garage with doors that probably cost more than my first truck. In the driveway, Clayton's BMW and a silver Lexus with Georgia plates. Vanessa was already here. I parked behind the Lexus and sat for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled. Through the front windows, I could see chandelier light the shadow of someone moving past. You can still leave a voice whispered. Drive away. Go to the bank tomorrow and never look back. But Lorraine's voice was louder. When you're ready. I got out of the car. The front door opened before I reached it. Bethany stood framed in golden light, wearing a cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's mortgage payments. Her smile was bright, brittle. Benjamin. She air-kissed near my cheek, her perfume overwhelming. We're so glad you could make it. Please come in. I stepped into the foyer. Marble floors, a chandelier that belonged in a hotel lobby. Through the archway to my left, I could see the dining room, crystal glasses, white linens, candles already lit. And standing near the fireplace, drinks in hand, were Clayton and Vanessa. They turned as I entered. Benjamin. Clayton crossed the room, hand extended. Thank you for coming. I shook his hand. His grip was firm, controlled a lawyer's handshake. Behind him, Vanessa offered a small wave, her smile uncertain. Can I get you something to drink? Bethany asked. We have wine scotch. Water's fine. Clayton's smile tightened. Of course. Make yourself comfortable. Dinner will be ready soon. A young man in a black vest appeared from the kitchen, hired help, I realized. He carried a tray of hors d'oeuvres that looked like art installations. I took a seat on the leather sofa, the brass key pressed against my ribs, and across from me, Clayton and Vanessa exchanged a glance I wasn't supposed to see. Here we go, I thought. Dinner began at 7:30. Clayton opened a bottle of wine that probably cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. The label was French, the year significant to someone who cared about such things. He poured 3 glasses white for Bethany and Vanessa red for himself. I stuck with water. To Mom, Clayton said, raising his glass. His voice carried that careful tone people use at funerals when they're performing grief rather than feeling it. And to family. Vanessa echoed the toast. Bethany smiled and sipped. I watched them over the rim of my water glass. The meal was catered, probably seared scallops, some kind of risotto vegetables arranged like they were posing for a magazine. The young man in the vest served each course with practiced efficiency, then disappeared back into the kitchen. The estate is so complicated, Vanessa said, cutting her scallop into precise pieces. So many moving parts. Properties, accounts, business interests. It's overwhelming. Mom was meticulous about finances, Clayton added. He swirled his wine, studied it against the candlelight. Everything documented, everything organized. But there's just so much paperwork. I nodded, said nothing. Let them fill the silence. We've been meeting with accountants all week, Bethany said. She touched Clayton's arm, a gesture that looked rehearsed. Trying to get everything sorted before we leave for Turks and Caicos next month. We booked it ages ago before everything happened. We thought about canceling, but life goes on. Vanessa finished softly. I set down my fork. Turks and Caicos. Nice. Mom would have wanted us to live our lives, Clayton said, but not get stuck in grief. Through the open door to Clayton's study, I could see his desk. Papers scattered across the surface. A stack of envelopes, some still sealed. The corner of one caught my eye, red lettering, Final Notice. I looked back at my plate. I've been going through Lorraine's things, I said. My voice was casual, conversational. You know, at the house. Sorting her clothes, her books. It's hard, but it needs to be done. Vanessa's fork paused halfway to her mouth. That must be difficult. It is. I took a sip of water. Found some papers, though. In her desk. Bank statements I didn't recognize. Accounts I'd never heard of. The air in the room shifted. It was subtle the way Clayton's jaw tightened, the way Vanessa's eyes flicked toward her brother. Estate accounts, Clayton said smoothly. I'm sure that's all they are. Everything's being processed through probate. Maybe. I let the word hang there. And I found a key. Small brass key. Doesn't fit anything in the house. Vanessa's hand trembled. Wine sloshed in her glass, a drop landing on the white tablecloth like a blood stain. Oh! She grabbed her napkin. I'm so clumsy. What kind of key? Clayton's voice had an edge now sharp beneath the lawyer's polish. I shrugged. Just a key. But Lorraine left it somewhere I'd find it. With a note. When you're ready, she wrote. Bethany leaned forward. Ready for what? I don't know yet. I met Clayton's eyes, but she wanted me to find it. Why would she do that? Clayton stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood. Benjamin, the estate's finances are complicated. You shouldn't be digging through documents without legal counsel present. If you've found paperwork, you need to turn it over to our attorney. Gerald Pemberton, the estate's attorney. Gerald is... He caught himself. Gerald has his own perspective, but the estate is being administered by Morrison and Associates. Interesting. I stayed seated, forced my voice to stay level. Because I spoke with Gerald. He said Lorraine's will should have left me certain protections under Massachusetts law, but apparently it didn't. Vanessa's face had gone pale. Benjamin, we're not trying to... I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I cut her off gently. I'm just trying to understand. Lorraine and I were married 22 years. She knew I'd be vulnerable after she died. So why would she leave me that key? Why would she want me to find those bank statements? Clayton's hands were clenched at his sides. You're upset. That's understandable. But you're reading things into this that aren't there. Maybe. I pushed my chair back and stood. Actually, I checked. Whatever that key opens, my name is on it too. Lorraine made sure of that. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Clayton's face had gone red. Vanessa stared at her plate. Bethany looked between them, confusion and something else, fear, maybe flickering across her features. I should go, I said. Thank you for dinner. Nobody moved to stop me. I walked through the foyer, aware of their eyes on my back. Behind me, I heard urgent whispers, Clayton's voice low and angry, Vanessa's higher, frightened. Bethany caught up with me at the door. Benjamin, wait. She glanced back toward the dining room. What key? What's going on? Bethany. Clayton's voice cut through the house like a blade. Not now. She flinched, then she opened the door for me. Her smile gone, her eyes hollow. Good night, Benjamin, she said quietly. I stepped into the cool November air. Behind me, the door clicked shut. I didn't go to my car immediately. Instead, I walked slowly down the driveway, letting the cold clear my head. Through the dining room window, I could see them, Clayton pacing, gesturing sharply, Vanessa with her face in her hands, Bethany standing frozen in the doorway. They were scared. Good, because whatever they were hiding, whatever game they thought they were playing, Lorraine had seen it coming. She'd left me that key, those bank statements, that note. When you're ready. I was ready now. I climbed into my car and drove away. In my rearview mirror, Clayton's house blazed with light, a beacon of wealth and lies. Tomorrow, I'd go to First National Bank. Tomorrow, I'd see what Lorraine had hidden. And tomorrow, everything would change. I drove home slowly, checking my mirrors every few blocks. Twice, I thought I saw headlights following me, a dark sedan that hung back just far enough to seem coincidental. But when I turned onto my street in Cambridge, it disappeared. Paranoia, maybe. Or maybe not. I parked in my usual spot and sat for a moment watching the house. The porch light was on just as I'd left it. The windows were dark. Everything looked normal. But something felt wrong. I climbed the front steps, key in hand. The lock turned smoothly. The door swung open. I stepped inside and flipped on the hallway light. Nothing obviously disturbed. The coat rack, the mail table, Lorraine's watercolor of Big Sur still hanging on the wall, but the air felt different, violated. I moved through the first floor, pulse quickening. The living room looked untouched. The kitchen was fine, but in Lorraine's office, the desk drawers were closed, but not quite flush. Papers that had been stacked neatly were slightly askew. The chair was pushed in, but at a different angle than I'd left it. Someone had been here. I checked the safe, still locked. They hadn't gotten the combination, but they'd tried. The dial was turned to a different number than where I'd left it. Upstairs, the bedroom had the same subtle wrongness. Drawers opened and closed carefully. My closet disturbed. Lorraine's jewelry box shifted an inch to the left. This wasn't a random burglary. Nothing was missing, not the cash I kept in the nightstand, not Lorraine's pearls, not the laptop on the desk. They'd been searching for something specific. The key. I reached into my jacket pocket. The brass key was still there, warm against my palm. I'd carried it with me to Clayton's. They'd torn my house apart looking for it, and I'd had it the whole time. Clayton and Vanessa. It had to be them. Or someone they'd hired. The realization hit me like cold water. They were desperate. And desperate people were dangerous. I stood in the bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of invasion, and felt rage burn through the grief and confusion. This was my home. The home I'd shared with Lorraine for 22 years. The place where we'd built our life together. And they'd violated it. My phone rang. I stared at the screen. Unknown number. Again. For a moment I considered ignoring it, but something made me answer. Hello. Dad. The voice was warm, familiar, edged with worry. It's Alexander. I'm sorry for calling so late. The tension in my shoulders released a fraction. Alexander, it's okay. I was awake. I heard about what Clayton and Vanessa are doing. His words came fast, urgent. A friend in Boston reached out. Dad, this isn't right. What they're trying to pull with the estate, it's not what Mom would have wanted. I sat down on the edge of the bed. How much do you know? Enough to know you need help. There was a pause, the sound of airport announcements in the background. I'm coming home. I just wrapped a recording session in London. I can catch a flight tonight. I'll be there tomorrow afternoon, Boston time. Alexander, you don't need to. Yes, I do. His voice was firm. You're my father. And Mom. He stopped, took a breath. Dad, Mom called me 2 months before she died. She said things were complicated. She told me to watch out for you. She said you'd know what to do when the time came. That I should trust you. My throat tightened. She called you. She knew something was wrong with Clayton and Vanessa. She didn't give me details, but I could hear it in her voice. She was protecting you. Another pause. She told me to tell you something. If things got bad, trust yourself. And don't let them make you doubt what you know is true. I looked down at the brass key in my hand. We'll talk when I land, Alexander said. And Dad, whatever you've found that key they're so scared of, don't let them intimidate you. Don't sign anything. Don't give them anything. I'm texting you my flight info now. Okay, I managed. I'll see you tomorrow. Hang in there. The line went dead. I sat in the silence of my ransacked bedroom, Lorraine's voice echoing in my memory. When you're ready. She'd known. She'd planned for this. She'd even warned Alexander. My phone buzzed. A text from Alexander BA213. Arrives Logan 3:45 p.m. Friday. Friday. Tomorrow. I stood and walked back to Lorraine's office. The brass key caught the light as I turned it in my fingers. Somewhere in this city was a lock this key would open. A safety deposit box at First National Bank, if I was reading the clues right. And inside that box, what documents evidence proof of whatever Clayton and Vanessa were so desperate to hide. Tomorrow morning, I'd go to the bank. Tomorrow afternoon, Alexander would arrive. And tomorrow night, everything would become clear. I locked the front door, checked the windows, and went upstairs to pack the key and the bank card in a place no one would think to look: the pocket of an old work jacket in the back of my closet. One I'd worn on construction sites decades ago. Let them search again if they wanted. They wouldn't find it. Outside, the Cambridge street was quiet. No dark sedan. No watching eyes. But I knew they were out there. Clayton and Vanessa, panicking, scrambling. And I knew something else too. Lorraine had given me everything I needed to fight back. I just had to be brave enough to use it. Friday morning. I arrived at First National Bank on Newbury Street just after 9. The building was old Boston granite facade, brass fixtures, marble floors that echoed with every footstep. I approached the receptionist. I need to speak with the manager about a safety deposit box. She picked up her phone, murmured something, then gestured toward leather chairs. Miss Patterson will be right with you. Mr. Donovan. A woman in her early 50s stood before me, hand extended, kind eyes, gray hair in a neat bun. I'm Rosemary Patterson, branch manager. Come with me. She led me into a small office. I have a key, I said, pulling it from my pocket. I believe my late wife had a safety deposit box here. Rosemary's face softened with relief. Mr. Donovan, I've been waiting for you. Waiting for me. Your wife came here several times over the past 6 months. Last visit was 2 weeks before she passed. She was very specific, only her name and yours on the access list. She said you'd come when you were ready. 6 months. Lorraine had been planning this while dying. If anyone else inquired about the box, I was to tell you immediately, Rosemary added. Has anyone asked? Not yet, but I suspect they might soon. She stood. Come with me. She led me through a secured door and down marble stairs. At the bottom was a steel vault door. Rosemary unlocked it with a key and code. The door groaned open. Inside was a room lined with deposit boxes. Cool air. Heavy silence. Box 412. She walked to the back corner and unlocked the outer gate. Your key opens the box. There's a viewing room through that door, private. Take your time. She retrieved the box, long metal, heavier than expected, and set it on a table in the small, windowless room. I'll be outside if you need anything, she said softly and left. I was alone. The brass key turned smoothly. The lid opened. Manila folders neatly labeled. A USB drive taped to the lid, documents organized with Lorraine's precision. And on top, a sealed envelope. My dearest Benjamin, read everything else first. Then open this letter. I love you. My hands shook. I set the letter aside and opened the first folder, Donovan Holdings, LLC. An account summary from a wealth management firm. The balance $8,750,000. Lorraine's name. My name. Joint signatories. Opened 8 months ago. Next folder, property lines. 32 Beacon Hill. A second mortgage 7 months ago, $2,400,000. Signed by Lorraine. We'd paid off the house 15 years ago. Third folder, property liens. Big Sewer Villa. Another mortgage, $3,500,000. She'd mortgaged both properties deliberately. Fourth folder, life insurance policies. The $450,000 policy Clayton mentioned. But behind it, $1,250,000. Beneficiary Benjamin Donovan. A third policy, $750,000. Also mine. Total $2,450,000. Not $450,000. Fifth folder, medical expenses. Outstanding. $425,000. I sat back, mind racing. Lorraine had moved money, hidden assets, mortgaged properties, structured debt, all while dying, all to protect me. The USB drive evidence, do not lose. Finally, I reached for the letter. sealed with wax. I broke it carefully and pulled out 2 pages dated 3 weeks before she died. My dearest Benjamin, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and it means Clayton and Vanessa have shown you exactly who they are. My vision blurred. I'm sorry, my love. I couldn't tell you while I was alive, but I needed you to see it for yourself. Everything in this box is the truth. Everything they told you is a lie. Trust Maxwell Rhodes. He'll help you finish what I started. I love you. Always. Lorraine. At the bottom, Maxwell Rhodes Esquire and a phone number. I sat in that windowless room surrounded by evidence of my wife's final battle. Lorraine hadn't abandoned me. She'd armed me. I gathered the folders, slipped them back into the box with the USB drive. The letter I folded carefully and put in my jacket pocket close to my heart. When I emerged from the viewing room, Rosemary was waiting in the corridor. Everything all right, Mr. Donovan? Yes. My voice was steadier than I expected. Thank you for waiting, for keeping this safe. She nodded. Your wife was a remarkable woman. She knew exactly what she was doing. She always did. Rosemary walked me back upstairs through the vault door, up the marble steps into the warmth of the bank lobby. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Outside Newbury Street bustled with Friday morning traffic. If you need anything else, Rosemary said, please don't hesitate. I shook her hand. I will. Thank you. I walked out into the November air, the box of documents secure under my arm. In my pocket, Lorraine's letter pressed against my ribs. In my phone, Maxwell Rhodes's number waited to be dialed. And this afternoon, Alexander would land at Logan. I wasn't alone anymore. I climbed into my car and sat for a moment, engine idling. The bank behind me, the city ahead, and somewhere out there, Clayton and Vanessa still thinking they'd won. They had no idea what was coming. I pulled out my phone and dialed Maxwell Rhodes. It rang twice before a voice answered. Rhodes and Associates. My name is Benjamin Donovan, I said. I need to speak with Maxwell Rhodes. It's about Lorraine Donovan's estate. A pause. Then, Mr. Donovan, we've been expecting your call. I set Lorraine's letter aside. She'd told me to read everything else first, and opened the first folder. The tab read, Clayton Dalton, Investigative Report. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Clayton at a casino in Reno, chips stacked in front of him. Clayton at a blackjack table in Las Vegas, drink in hand. His tie loosened his expression, animated in a way I'd never seen. Clayton with men in expensive suits at a high-roller table, their faces blurred, but their body language unmistakable, predatory, calculating. The timestamps spanned 8 months. The most recent was dated 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, Lorraine had still been alive. Beneath the photos were financial records. Bank statements showing cash withdrawals, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, $20,000 in a single night. Credit card statements with cash advances maxed out. Loan applications stamped approved in red ink. And at the bottom of each application, a signature. My signature. But I'd never signed them. I flipped to the next page and found a note from the investigator, James Miller. Subject has accumulated gambling debts estimated at $560,000 across multiple creditors. High-interest loans in default. Payment plans abandoned. Loan documents submitted to Capital Bridge Lending and Horizon Financial Bear. Forged signature of Benjamin Donovan, co-owner of Donovan Construction. Email correspondence suggests intent to use company assets as collateral without consent or knowledge of co-owner. My hands started to shake. I'd built that company, 30 years of my life, brick by brick, project by project. And Clayton had tried to bet it away. I forced myself to keep reading. There were emails, printed, highlighted, annotated in Lorraine's careful handwriting. From Clayton.Dalton@crossmanlegal.com to R.Garrett@Capital Bridge Lending. Come date March 14th, subject Donovan Construction, LOC. We can use the construction company as collateral. My father won't notice until it's already processed. By then we'll have restructured everything. Move fast. Window closes when Mom does. I stared at the words until they blurred. Window closes when Mom does. He'd written that while Lorraine was in hospice, while I was sitting beside her bed, reading to her, holding her hand. He'd been planning this. I closed the folder and reached for the next one, my chest tight. Vanessa Pierce, investigative report. More photos. Vanessa at client meetings, shaking hands with elderly couples in cardigans and sensible shoes. Vanessa in her office, surrounded by framed credentials, certified financial planner, investment advisor, wealth management specialist, all impressive, all fake. The investigator's summary was even more damning than Clayton's. Subject operates fraudulent investment advisory service under the name Pierce Financial Advisory, Atlanta, Georgia. Classic Ponzi scheme, targeting retirees and elderly clients. Estimated $740,000 misappropriated from client accounts between 2019 to 2023. Money transferred to offshore entities in Cayman Islands and British Virgin Islands. Multiple complaints filed with Georgia Securities Commission. Cease and desist orders pending. Credentials falsified. No legitimate license to operate as financial advisor. There were bank records showing the transfers wire after wire, 50,000 here, 80,000 there, all flowing to accounts with names like Meridian Holdings, LLC, and Sapphire Trust International. Shell companies, all of them. There were testimonials from victims, handwritten letters from people who'd lost their retirement savings, their children's inheritance, their ability to pay for medical care, and more emails. From Vanessa.Pierce@PierceAdvisory.com to Clayton.Dalton@CrossmanLegal.com. Date February 18th. Subject Mom. She's been diagnosed. Stage 4, 6 to 12 months, they said. We need to move quickly. The reply came the next day. Understood. We restructure the estate before she dies. Get everything transferred into the trust I'm setting up. What about Benjamin? Vanessa's response was immediate. Benjamin won't be a problem. He's too passive. He'll do whatever we tell him. He always has. I had to stop reading. My vision was swimming my chest so tight I couldn't breathe. They'd written that the day after Lorraine's diagnosis, while I was still processing the word terminal, still trying to understand what 6 to 12 months meant, still bargaining with God for more time, they'd been planning how to divide the spoils. I opened the third folder with trembling hands. Conspiracy, email evidence. The emails were organized chronologically, a timeline of betrayal that stretched across 9 months. February 20th. Clayton to Vanessa. Doctor gave her 6 to 12 months. We need to be strategic. Start moving your offshore assets now. Clean everything up before the feds come sniffing. I'll handle the estate paperwork. When she goes, we move fast. 30 days to get Benjamin out of the house and into something manageable. Grief will make him compliant. April 10th. Vanessa to Clayton. What if Benjamin doesn't cooperate? What if he fights? Clayton's reply, he won't. And if he does, we have options. The will is airtight. Gerald helped me draft it. Benjamin gets $25,000 and whatever's left after debts, which will be nothing. May 3rd. Clayton to Vanessa. Mom's asking questions about the loan applications. She saw something on a credit report. She's sharper than we thought. Vanessa's response. Stall her. Tell her it's identity theft and you're handling it. She's weak now. Medication is making her foggy. If she pushes, we'll say Benjamin did it and didn't tell her. June 3rd. The final email. Hospice says weeks, not months, maybe days. We execute the moment she's gone. I'll have the paperwork ready. Benjamin will sign. He always does what he's told. I couldn't read anymore. My hands were shaking so hard the papers rattled. My throat burned. My eyes stung. Lorraine had been dying, fading a little more each day, and they'd been circling, waiting, planning how to strip me of everything the moment she took her last breath. I sat in the vault's cold, sterile silence, surrounded by evidence so damning it felt like fiction. But it wasn't fiction. It was real. Lorraine had seen it. She'd hired James Miller. She'd gathered proof photos, emails, bank records, testimonies. She'd built an airtight case while fighting stage 4 cancer, while pretending everything was fine at family dinners, while protecting me from the truth, because she knew it would destroy me. And she'd left it all here, for me, so I would know, so I could fight back. I looked at the last folder, Financial Protection Plan. I pulled it toward me, my heart pounding, and opened it. Inside was Lorraine's handwriting, a plan, a strategy, a weapon. And as I read the first line, I finally understood what she'd done. The handwriting was Lorraine's, but the tone was different from anything I'd read before. Not the warm, gentle voice I'd known for 22 years. This was strategic, clinical, the voice of someone who'd seen the truth and refused to look away. Financial Protection Plan. Notes for Benjamin. My dearest, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if Clayton and Vanessa came to you within days of my death, then everything I feared has come true. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. But I needed to be certain, and I needed to protect you from the burden of knowing while I was still here. What you've seen in these folders is the truth. Clayton is drowning in gambling debts. Vanessa is running a scheme that's about to collapse, and together they plan to use my death and your grief to take everything. But I didn't let them. I stopped my breath, caught in my throat. She'd known, all of it. And instead of confronting them, instead of tearing the family apart while she was still alive, she'd quietly, methodically built a fortress around me. 7 months ago, I started moving assets. I created an entity they don't know exists. I took out mortgages on properties I own outright and made sure those debts would transfer to anyone who tried to claim them. I restructured the life insurance so that you and only you are protected. The inheritance they think they're getting, it's a trap. My hands trembled as I read those words again. A trap, not an accident, not a mistake, a deliberate, calculated trap. Here's what they'll inherit if they pursue the estate. 2 properties, beautiful, valuable, and mortgaged far beyond their worth. If they accept them, the debt transfers. Foreclosure will begin within 30 days, bankruptcy within 90. The debts Clayton mentioned. They're real, but they're attached to the properties, not to you. I made sure of that. The life insurance. There are 3 policies. The one Clayton knows about is small, a decoy. The real policies name you as the sole beneficiary. They'll never see a cent. The money, it's safe, all of it, in an account only you can access. Maxwell Rhodes has the documentation. He'll walk you through everything. I had to set the paper down. My vision was blurring. 8.75 million. That's what the balance sheet had shown. Money I'd never known about quietly moved and protected while Lorraine was fighting for her life. She'd built me a lifeboat, and she'd loaded it with everything we'd worked for. I picked up the letter again, my throat tight. I know what you're thinking, Benjamin. You're thinking this is cruel, that I should have talked to them, reasoned with them, given them a chance to be better. But I tried. I confronted Clayton about the gambling 2 years ago. He promised to stop. He didn't. I asked Vanessa about the complaints from her clients. She told me they were lies. They weren't. I gave them chances, over and over. And they chose greed. So I chose you. Tears blurred the page now. I wiped them away and kept reading. This isn't about revenge. It's about consequences. They wanted to take what we built together and leave you with nothing. Now they'll face the results of their own choices. You have options, my love. Option 1. Let the will stand as written. They inherit the properties and the debts. You walk away clean with the money I've protected for you. Option 2, contest the will and expose everything, the fraud, the gambling, the forgery. Maxwell can help with that. It will be public, ugly, but it will be the truth. Option 3, offer them a deal. Let them sign away their claims in exchange for you not pursuing criminal charges. Maxwell has prepared the documents. The choice is yours. I trust you to make it. But Benjamin, please don't let guilt make you weak. Don't let their tears or their excuses change what you know to be true. They were willing to destroy you. Don't let them. The letter was signed with a single initial L, and beneath it a postscript, P.S. There's a bench by the Charles River where we used to sit on Friday afternoons. When you're ready to say goodbye, meet me there. I left something for you. I sat in the vault for a long time, the letter in my hands, the weight of Lorraine's love and strategy pressing down on me. She'd seen the danger. She'd anticipated their moves, and she'd armed me with everything I needed to fight back. Not with anger, with information, not with vengeance, with justice. Around me, the evidence lay scattered. Clayton's gambling receipts, Danielia's wire transfers, the emails plotting my downfall, the plan that would turn their greed against them. Lorraine had spent her final months building this, while I'd been reading to her, bringing her tea, holding her hand through the worst of the pain she'd been working, protecting, preparing. I thought about the last conversation we'd had, 2 days before she died. She'd been so weak her voice was barely audible, but she'd gripped my hand with surprising strength and said, "Promise me you'll trust yourself, Benjamin. Don't let anyone tell you who you are." At the time, I'd thought she meant the grief, the loneliness, the inevitable questions about identity and purpose after loss. But now I understood. She'd been preparing me for this moment, for the discovery, for the choice I would have to make. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the folder. Then I gathered everything, the investigators' reports, the conspiracy emails, the financial plan, the business card for Maxwell Roads, and stood. My legs were unsteady, but my mind was clear. Rosemary was waiting outside, her expression patient and kind. "Find what you needed?" she asked gently. I nodded. "Yes, thank you. Will you be closing the box?" "Not yet," I said. "I may need to come back." She nodded and walked me to the elevator. As I stepped out onto Newbury Street, the afternoon sun was bright and sharp. The city moved around me, people rushing to appointments, cars honking at intersections, life continuing as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Lorraine had given me a choice, and she'd given me the tools to make it. The question now wasn't whether I was strong enough to use them. The question was what kind of man I wanted to be when this was over. I thought about Clayton's confident smile 3 days ago, Vanessa's sympathetic hand on my arm, the way they'd handed me documents as if I were a child who needed guidance. They'd underestimated me. They'd thought grief would make me compliant. They'd thought I would sign whatever they put in front of me and fade quietly into the background of their plans. They were wrong, and tomorrow I would start showing them exactly how wrong they were. I left the vault around noon, the documents secure in a leather briefcase Rosemary had provided. My hands had stopped shaking, My breathing had steadied. I walked up the marble stairs into the bank lobby, blinking against the brightness, and stopped. Alexander was standing there, tall, late 30s, dressed in the casual elegance of someone who'd spent half his life in recording studios and concert halls. Quality jeans, a charcoal blazer over a simple black shirt, a leather messenger bag slung across his shoulder. His eyes, Lorraine's eyes, kind and observant, were tired from the overnight flight, but they lit up when they found me. "Dad." "Alexander." He crossed the lobby in 3 strides and pulled me into a hug. Long, tight, wordless. I felt something in my chest crack open the armor I'd been wearing since Lorraine died. When we finally stepped back, Rosemary was standing at a discreet distance, giving us space. "Thank you," I told her, "for everything." She nodded, smiled gently, and returned to her desk. Alexander and I walked out into the November sunshine. "There's a cafe down the block," I said. "We need to talk. Lead the way." We found a quiet place on Newbury Street tucked between an art gallery and a bookstore. Small tables exposed brick, the smell of espresso and fresh pastries. We took a corner booth, ordered coffee. Alexander studied me across the table. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "In a way, I have." I set the briefcase on the seat beside me. "Lorraine's ghost. Her plan. Tell me." So I did. I kept it brief, no need to repeat every detail I'd read in that vault. But I told him about Clayton's gambling debts, Vanessa's investment fraud, the forged signatures on loan documents using Donovan Construction as collateral. I told him about the emails, the conspiracy they'd plotted while Lorraine was dying in a hospital bed. And then I told him about Lorraine's counterattack, the hidden money, the debt trap, the real will versus the fake one, the evidence she'd gathered, the attorney she'd hired without anyone knowing. Alexander's face darkened with each revelation. They did this while she was in the hospital. His voice was quiet, controlled, but I could hear the fury beneath it. I nodded. I tried to help when she got sick," Alexander said. "I called Clayton, offered to pay for experimental treatments, private care, whatever she needed. He said no, said the family would handle it. I thought he meant we'd all carry the burden together." He looked down at his coffee. "But he just didn't want me involved in the estate. Because you would have seen what they were doing." I should have pushed harder. I should have. "You were on tour in Europe," I said firmly. "You came home for the funeral. That's more than they did even when she was alive." Alexander's jaw tightened. He picked up his coffee, set it down without drinking. "Clayton used to be different," he said quietly. "When we were kids, he was not warm exactly, but decent, responsible. And Vanessa was sweet. She'd bake cookies, send birthday cards." He shook his head. "I don't know when it changed. Money changes people, or reveals who they always were." Silence settled between us. Around us, the cafe hummed with Friday afternoon energy. Students on laptops, couples sharing pastries, a world that felt impossibly normal. When Mom called me 2 months ago, Alexander said, "She didn't give me details, but she said if anything happened to you, if Clayton and Vanessa tried something, I should come home immediately. She said you'd need help." She was right. She usually was. A sad smile crossed his face. She also told me something else. She said, "Alexander, your father is stronger than he thinks, but he spent 22 years being kind. Sometimes kindness looks like weakness to cruel people. Don't let them mistake one for the other." My throat tightened. "She knew you'd fight back." Alexander continued. "She just wanted to make sure you had the weapons to do it." I thought of the folders in my briefcase, The evidence, the hidden accounts, the trap Lorraine had so carefully constructed. "What do we do now?" Alexander asked. "There's an attorney, Maxwell Rhodes. Lorraine left his card. I think we need to see him. Today. Today." Alexander nodded. "Then let's go. Together." Together. We paid for the coffee and walked out into the afternoon. The sun was high now, warming the brick sidewalks of Newbury Street. Shoppers strolled past boutique windows. A street musician played saxophone on the corner. Life going on, oblivious to the battle being waged in wills and bank vaults. Dad. Alexander glanced at me as we walked. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. For not just rolling over, for fighting. I haven't done anything yet. You found the key. You went to the bank. You're still standing." He adjusted his messenger bag. "That's more than they expected." We turned onto Federal Street. Office buildings rose around us, glass and granite reaching toward the sky. Maxwell Rhodes's office was in a tower at the corner, older than the banks around it, but solid, respectable. We stopped at the entrance. "Ready?" Alexander asked. I thought of Lorraine, of her final letter, of the words she'd written, "Live Benjamin," live fully, for both of us. "Ready," I said. We walked through the revolving doors together. For the first time since Lorraine died, I didn't feel alone. Friday afternoon, Benjamin and Alexander stood outside a modest building on Federal Street in downtown Boston. The brass plaque beside the entrance read, "Rhodes and Associates Attorneys at Law." We took the elevator to the 5th floor. The reception area was small but professional, dark wood furniture, framed law degrees, a view of the financial district through tall windows. The receptionist looked up and smiled. "Mr. Donovan, Mr. Rhodes is expecting you. Go right in." She gestured toward a heavy oak door. Maxwell Rhodes stood as we entered. Early 60s, silver hair combed back, sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a navy suit that had seen better days, but was impeccably pressed. There was a quiet confidence about him, the kind that came from decades of courtroom battles. "Mr. Donovan," he extended his hand. His grip was firm, warm. "Alexander, please sit." We took the chairs across from his desk. The office was lined with law books, case files stacked with military precision. On the credenza behind him, a photograph of a younger Rhodes with a woman and 2 children. Family. "I've been waiting for this meeting," Maxwell said, settling into his chair. "Your wife was one of the most intelligent clients I've ever had the privilege to represent." "How long did you work with her?" I asked. "She hired me 8 months ago, after she discovered the irregularities, the conspiracy," Alexander said flatly. Maxwell nodded. "Yes. Let me walk you through the timeline." He opened a folder on his desk, organized, annotated everything Lorraine would have approved of. Lorraine first suspected Clayton and Vanessa were planning something about 9 months ago. Small things. Financial questions they asked. Their sudden interest in the estate structure. She hired a private investigator, James Miller, excellent work, and he uncovered everything. "The gambling," I said. "The fraud," Alexander added. "The forgeries," Maxwell finished. "And the emails. The conspiracy they were orchestrating while she was dying." He leaned back in his chair. "Lorraine came to me with all the evidence. She asked me to evaluate her options." "And what were they?" I asked. "Option 1, criminal prosecution. File charges. Let the state handle it." Maxwell's expression was somber. "She refused. She said, 'They're still my children. I won't destroy them. But I won't let them destroy Benjamin either.'" Alexander's jaw tightened. Option 2, Maxwell continued, was financial justice. Create a structure that would protect you, Mr. Donovan, while ensuring Clayton and Vanessa faced consequences proportional to their actions. The debt trap, I said. Precisely. Maxwell pulled out another document. We moved assets into Donovan Holdings, LLC. Completely legal, completely clean. They can't trace it. The account is in your name and Lorraine's. Joint signatories. It became active 7 months ago. And the mortgages on the properties? Lorraine took those out deliberately. She mortgaged the Boston house and the Big Sur villa beyond their market value. If Clayton and Vanessa inherit those properties, they inherit debt that will bankrupt them within months. And the wills? Alexander asked. Maxwell smiled thinly. Ah, yes. Lorraine created 2 wills. The first a decoy she allowed to be filed through Gerald Pemberton's office. That will leaves the properties to Clayton and Vanessa with minimal provisions for your father. Gerald doesn't know, I asked. Gerald Pemberton is a good man, but his firm has a leak a paralegal Clayton befriended years ago. Lorraine discovered this. She quietly stopped using Gerald's firm for sensitive matters and came to me. Gerald has no idea the will in his possession is outdated. And the real will? I asked. Maxwell opened his safe and withdrew a sealed envelope. He laid it on the desk. This is the real will, executed 6 weeks before Lorraine died. Properly witnessed, notarized, legally unassailable. It supersedes anything filed with Gerald's office. He slid it across the desk to me. I broke the seal, read the first page. I, Lorraine Donovan, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath all assets, properties, and accounts to my husband, Benjamin Donovan. She left me everything, I said quietly. With one stipulation, Maxwell said. You have sole discretion to gift the Boston and Big Sur properties to Clayton and Vanessa. If you choose to do so, those gifts include all associated debts and obligations. Alexander leaned forward. So Dad can give them the properties loaded with debt, or give them nothing at all. Correct. Either way they lose, I said. Either way they face the consequences of their choices. Maxwell folded his hands. If they accept the properties, the debt transfers with ownership, they'll face foreclosure within 3 to 6 months. Their creditors' gambling debts fraud victims will come after them simultaneously. Total exposure approximately 1.3 million. And if they refuse the gift, then they inherit nothing from the estate, and their existing creditors will still pursue them. Either path leads to the same destination. I sat back processing. Around us, the office was silent, except for the faint hum of traffic 5 stories below. Lorraine believed in consequences, Maxwell said softly. This was her form of justice. Alexander looked at me. What do you want to do, Dad? I thought of the emails. Clayton's contempt. He's too soft. He won't fight back. I thought of Vanessa's cruelty, Mom's confused from the medication. I thought of Lorraine spending her final weeks building this fortress to protect me. I met Maxwell's eyes. I want to finish what Lorraine started, I said. Justice, her way. Maxwell nodded slowly. Then we'll need to move quickly. Clayton and Vanessa will figure out something's wrong soon. When they do, they'll fight. Let them, Alexander said. His voice was steel. Maxwell stood and extended his hand again. Then let's begin. Maxwell nodded and began spreading documents across the conference table. Alexander and I leaned forward, watching as he laid out the battle plan with methodical precision. Here's how we proceed, Maxwell said. We let them think they've won until the very last moment. He arranged the papers like chess pieces. Step 1, I contact Gerald Pemberton tonight. I'll inform him that I was Lorraine's actual attorney for the past 8 months. He'll be shocked, but he'll cooperate. Gerald was deceived, not complicit. Will he believe you? I asked. I have documentation. Lorraine left a letter for him explaining everything, why she switched firms, why she kept it secret. Gerald's a professional. Once he sees the evidence, he'll understand. Maxwell tapped the next document. Step 2. We schedule a final settlement meeting at Gerald's office. Neutral territory. Clayton and Vanessa will expect a simple signing ceremony transferring assets, closing the estate. Instead, they'll walk into a reckoning. When? Alexander asked. Next Friday, 1 week from today, 2 o'clock. Why wait a week? I asked. Preparation. I need to coordinate with Gerald, draft the documents, ensure everything is airtight. And Maxwell glanced at Alexander. I believe we have an advantage they don't know about. Me, Alexander said. You. Maxwell smiled slightly. They think Benjamin is alone and vulnerable. Your presence arriving mid-meeting will shatter that illusion. He outlined Alexander's role. Don't attend from the start. Wait in a private office. Maxwell would text a signal, then walk in during the confrontation. Psychological impact, Maxwell explained. The successful son they dismissed will witness their collapse. It will compound their humiliation. I can do that, Alexander said quietly. I shifted in my seat. What about criminal charges, the fraud, the forged signatures? Maxwell's expression grew somber. We have evidence, but prosecution would require Lorraine's testimony, which we no longer have. The cases would be difficult, outcomes uncertain. Civil fraud charges could work, but they'd take years. He tapped the stack of documents. This way, the consequences are immediate. Financial collapse is more certain than jail time. Mom chose the guaranteed option, Alexander said. Your mother was pragmatic. She knew this would hurt them more than prison. Their reputations, their lifestyles, their illusions of success, all destroyed. Maxwell pulled out specific documents and explained each one. Gift deeds transferring the properties with the debt attached. Debt assumption agreements they must sign accepting all obligations. Release documents Benjamin is freed from any estate liability. Evidence packets everything they need to see to understand what they've walked into. He spread financial summaries across the table. When they see these numbers, 5.9 million in debt versus 4.75 million in assets, they'll realize the trap. What if they refuse everything? I asked. Then they leave with nothing, and within 30 to 60 days, their existing creditors will file lawsuits. Wage garnishments, asset seizures, bankruptcy. Either path leads to ruin. Silence settled over the conference table. Through the window, Boston's financial district gleamed in the afternoon sun, towers of glass and steel where fortunes were made and lost every day. Alexander spoke carefully. Dad, are you absolutely certain once we do this there's no going back? They were Mom's children. I looked at my son, at Maxwell, then down at the documents spread before me. They made their choice when they conspired against Lorraine while she was dying, I said. When they forged my signature. When they called me too soft in their emails. When they planned to throw me out of my own home within 30 days of her death. My voice was steady, quiet, final. They chose greed. Lorraine chose justice. So do I. Maxwell nodded. Then it's decided. The meeting is next Friday, 2 o'clock. I'll contact Gerald tonight. He'll be surprised, but he'll understand once I explain. In the meantime, you two should prepare yourselves. This will be difficult. Emotionally, I mean. We know, Alexander said. Maxwell gathered the documents and returned them to his briefcase. One more thing. Between now and Friday, Clayton and Vanessa may try to contact you, Benjamin. They may sense something's wrong. Don't engage. Don't answer their calls. Let them wonder. I can do that. Good. Maxwell stood and extended his hand. Gentlemen, we have our plan. 1 week from today, justice will be served. Lorraine's way. Alexander and I left the office and took the elevator down. The descent felt longer than the ascent waited with what we'd just set in motion. On the street, Alexander turned to me. You okay? No, I said honestly. But I will be. We walked to where I'd parked on Federal Street. The November air was crisp, the sun already low on the horizon. Friday afternoon traffic hummed around us. Where are you staying? I asked. I was going to get a hotel, but... Stay at the house. Your old room is still there. Lorraine never let me change it. Alexander smiled sadly. I'd like that. We climbed into my car. As I started the engine, Alexander asked quietly, Dad, are you ready for this? I thought of Lorraine's letter. Her final words, live Benjamin, live fully, for both of us. I have to be, I said. For Lorraine. I pulled out into traffic and we drove toward Cambridge together. Behind us, in his fifth-floor office, Maxwell Rhodes was already drafting the documents that would bring Clayton and Vanessa's world crashing down. 1 week. 7 days until everything changed. Before I reveal what happened in that room. If you're still here with me, comment the number 15 below so I know you're standing through this with me. What happened next changed everything. And one important note before we continue, the next part of this story includes dramatized elements created for narrative and educational purposes. If this kind of content isn't for you, this is the moment you can step away. Friday, 2 o'clock. The clock on the wall inside Gerald Pemberton's conference room ticked with quiet authority as I stepped through the door and paused just long enough to take in the room. Sunlight filtered through tall windows overlooking Federal Street, casting sharp rectangles of light across the polished mahogany table. The room smelled faintly of leather and old paper, neutral, professional, unfeeling. Clayton sat at the head of the table as though it already belonged to him. His suit was immaculate navy, with a subtle pinstripe cufflinks, catching the light when he moved. He leaned back with one ankle resting casually on the opposite knee, radiating the relaxed confidence of a man who believed he was moments away from securing his victory. Vanessa sat to his right posture, upright hands folded atop a leather portfolio. She offered me a thin, cautious smile. Bethany, seated slightly apart, scrolled idly through her phone. Her expression bored, as though this were merely another administrative inconvenience to check off before dinner reservations. Benjamin Clayton said smoothly, gesturing toward an empty chair across from him. Good. Let's keep this efficient. Gerald stood near the window rather than taking his usual seat. His shoulders were tense, and the crease between his brows suggested something was weighing on him. He cleared his throat. Before we begin, he said, voice lower than usual. There's someone you need to meet. Clayton's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? The conference room door opened again. A man stepped inside carrying a black briefcase. He was in his early 60s, silver hair, neatly combed back posture, straight without stiffness. His presence filled the room not through volume, but through certainty. Good afternoon, he said calmly. My name is Maxwell Rhodes. I represent the estate of Lorraine Donovan. The silence that followed was immediate and sharp. Clayton blinked. Excuse me, Maxwell set his briefcase on the table with deliberate care and unlatched it. Mr. Pemberton's firm ceased representation of Mrs. Donovan 2 months prior to her passing. That's absurd, Clayton snapped. Gerald has handled our family matters for years. Gerald stepped forward, voice heavy. Clayton, I wasn't aware of the change. I was not informed. There was a breach of confidentiality within Mr. Pemberton's firm, Maxwell continued evenly. Mrs. Donovan discovered it and chose to transfer representation privately. Mr. Pemberton was not complicit. He was simply unaware. Clayton's composure thinned. This is ridiculous. The will is already filed. Maxwell removed a slim laptop from his briefcase and connected it to the conference room screen. With a soft click, the display illuminated. Let's clarify which will you're referring to. Two documents appeared side by side. The first, Maxwell said, pointing to the left, dated 8 months ago. The second, executed 6 weeks prior to Mrs. Donovan's death. Vanessa leaned forward involuntarily. Under Massachusetts law, Maxwell continued, the most recent valid will supersedes all prior versions. Clayton rose halfway from his chair. She wasn't thinking clearly at that point. Maxwell advanced the slide. A medical evaluation filled the screen. Neurological assessment conducted 3 months before her passing. Maxwell read. Conclusions. Donovan was fully competent and capable of executing legal documents. She demonstrated clarity of thought and independent judgment. Vanessa's fingers curled against the edge of the table. Maxwell did not rush. He did not raise his voice. He allowed each piece of information to settle before introducing the next. The slide changed again. Photographs. Clayton in casinos. Reno, Las Vegas, Atlantic City. Timestamps stamped boldly beneath each image. Stacks of chips. Cash exchanged. Tables lit in harsh, fluorescent glare. Financial summaries followed. Total gambling debt over the last 12 months, Maxwell said calmly, $560,000. Clayton's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. The next image showed loan applications. On the left, a scanned signature labeled Benjamin Donovan. On the right, authenticated signature samples. The discrepancies were glaring. These documents were submitted to financial institutions using forged authorization, Maxwell said. Collateral listed included interests in Donovan Construction. Clayton opened his mouth as if to object, then closed it again. Vanessa shifted in her chair. Maxwell changed the slide once more. Client statements, withdrawal discrepancies, transfer logs, offshore accounts. Pierce Financial Advisory, he read, operated without appropriate licensing. Misappropriated funds totaling approximately $740,000. Vanessa's composure fractured. Her face drained of color. Maxwell advanced again. Emails appeared on the screen. Lines of text projected large and undeniable. Mom's diagnosis is stage 4, 6 to 12 months. We restructure the estate before she dies. Benjamin won't be a problem. She's weak. Stall her. As soon as she's gone, we move. Each sentence echoed in the quiet room. Vanessa's breathing grew uneven. Clayton's knuckles whitened around the edge of the table. All of this, Maxwell said, is admissible. The final slide appeared. A financial summary. Boston residence appraised value $2.1 million. Mortgage $2.4 million. Big Sur property appraised $2.65 million. Mortgage $3.5 million. Combined assets $4.75 million. Combined debt $5.9 million. Net position negative $1.15 million. Clayton stared at the numbers as if they might rearrange themselves if he focused hard enough. Mrs. Donovan refinanced both properties 6 months ago, Maxwell said. Those liabilities transfer with ownership. This is a setup, Clayton muttered. It is a legal structure, Maxwell corrected. Clayton's voice rose. We refuse. Then you inherit nothing. Maxwell replied. And your existing creditors estimated at approximately 1.3 million between you will proceed independently. The air in the room thickened. The conference room door opened once more. Alexander stepped inside. Clayton's head snapped toward him. Vanessa's lips parted in shock. "Alexander," she whispered. He walked in calmly, closing the door behind him. "I'm here for my father," he said quietly. Clayton scoffed. "This isn't your concern." Alexander's gaze did not waver. "It became my concern the moment you decided to turn her illness into an opportunity." Silence. I rose from my seat. For a moment I looked at them not as adversaries but as people I had once tried to love like my own. 22 years, I said softly. I tried to be present, to support you, to treat you as my children. Neither met my eyes. She saw everything I continued, and she left me a choice. I slid a stack of documents across the table. "Here are the terms," I said. "You may accept transfer of the properties along with all associated debt, or you may decline and walk away with no claim on the estate." Vanessa's hand trembled. "Benjamin, please." "You have 5 minutes," I said evenly. The clock on the wall ticked. Bethany stood abruptly and stepped away from the table, distancing herself physically from the conversation. Clayton exhaled sharply. "You can't do this." "I already have," I replied. Vanessa reached toward me, eyes wet. "We made mistakes." "Yes," I said, quietly. "You did." Clayton grabbed a pen. "This is coercion," he said through clenched teeth. Maxwell folded his hands. "It is an agreement." Clayton signed. Vanessa followed. The scratch of pen against paper seemed louder than the ticking clock. Bethany walked out without a word. Clayton stood jaw tight, refusing to look at me. Vanessa kept her gaze lowered. They left together, but not united. The door closed behind them. Gerald exhaled slowly. "I truly didn't know." "I believe you," I said. Maxwell shut down the projector and closed his briefcase. "They have 30 days before lenders initiate foreclosure procedures," he said. Alexander stepped beside me, resting a steady hand on my shoulder. The room returned to stillness. Chairs, table, windows overlooking Federal Street. But something fundamental had shifted. The weight that had pressed against my chest for weeks loosened. "It's finished," Maxwell said quietly. I nodded. For the first time since Lorraine's funeral, I inhaled without feeling like the air might break me, and I understood something simple and irreversible. They had expected me to disappear. Instead, I stood. 3 months later, I found myself standing barefoot on the cedar deck of a house that did not carry the weight of history. The Pacific stretched before me, vast and indifferent, its surface shifting from silver to pale blue as the sun climbed slowly above the horizon. Morning light spilled across the water in quiet bands, and for the first time in a long while, I felt no urgency pressing against my ribs. The house in Monterey was not grand. It did not need to be. Weathered shingles, wide windows that invited the sea inside a narrow path, lined with succulents and smooth coastal stones, everything about it suggested endurance without excess. It was a place built for wind and salt, not for display. Big Sur had been dramatic cinematic, tied to vows and anniversaries and photographs that captured younger versions of us, smiling against cliffs and crashing waves. But that house carried echoes too loud to live with. This one was gentler. This one did not demand anything of me. I held my coffee in both hands and breathed in air that tasted faintly of salt and eucalyptus. Morning had become sacred here. Before emails, before phone calls, before decisions, just quiet. The horizon felt endless in a way that was not intimidating, but generous. It reminded me that life extended far beyond the rooms where I had once believed everything would end. So much had shifted in 90 days. The Boston brownstone was no longer mine, nor was the villa overlooking the Pacific cliffs where Lorraine and I had once renewed our vows. I sold both properties before legal machinery could grind them down further. The process had been methodical, not emotional. Contracts reviewed, signatures placed, funds transferred, mortgages extinguished, liens satisfied. I watched the numbers settle with the detached clarity of someone who understood that buildings, however beautiful, were never the heart of a life. They were its container. Donovan Construction had been harder to release. 30 years of projects, crews, scaffolding, the smell of concrete dust in the early morning air. Those memories lived not in walls, but in muscle and instinct. I sold the company to my foreman and the crew who had worked beside me for decades. They knew its rhythm. They understood the value of doing something well and doing it honestly. I did not want a corporation swallowing it whole. I wanted it to continue breathing in familiar hands. The transaction felt less like a sale and more like a passing of stewardship. When the paperwork was complete, I packed what mattered: Lorraine's letters, a handful of photographs, a set of old drafting pencils I could not bring myself to discard. I loaded my truck and drove west. 3,000 miles of highways, motels, roadside diners, states blurring into one another. I did not rush. I did not linger. I simply moved forward. The funds secured under Donovan Holdings' $8.75 million remained invested under professional management, structured to generate stability rather than extravagance. I chose to live quietly off the interest. I did not want a life defined by wealth. I wanted one defined by peace. Clayton and Vanessa crossed my thoughts occasionally, like distant weather reports that no longer required immediate attention. I knew enough to understand that consequences had unfolded as expected. Bankruptcy filings, suspensions, civil complaints advancing through courts. Their lives had narrowed. Their choices had returned to them. I felt no satisfaction in that knowledge. The collapse of someone else's world is not a victory. It is simply gravity doing what gravity does. Bethany had left Clayton swiftly. News reached me indirectly through mutual acquaintances. She relocated, remarried, resumed a version of the life she preferred. I bore her no ill will. Survival takes different shapes for different people. My days in Monterey found a rhythm. I rose early, walked along the coastal path, while fog still hovered over the water, returned home as sunlight burned through the mist. I began volunteering at a local community center that offered support groups for widowers, men in their 60s and 70s who sat in folding chairs, hands clasped, unsure how to fill the hours once structured around another person's breathing. I did not present myself as an expert. I simply listened. Grief, I discovered, is less about losing someone than about losing the version of yourself that existed beside them. We rebuild that version slowly, often reluctantly. The men spoke of empty closets, untouched coffee mugs, the strange disorientation of cooking for one. I recognized the weight in their words. I also established a scholarship at Boston University in Lorraine's name, specifically within the architecture department. Lorraine had always admired thoughtful design spaces that balanced strength and beauty. The scholarship was modest, but intentional, awarded to students who demonstrated both skill and integrity. I wanted her name attached not to monuments, but to beginnings. Allison Rhodes had reached out, inviting me to speak to a group focused on financial recovery and accountability. I had not yet committed. I was still considering how much of my experience belonged to me and how much could serve others. 2 days ago, a letter arrived. The envelope was worn, the handwriting uneven but deliberate. Georgia postmark. I placed it on the kitchen table and left it there for 48 hours. Not out of fear, out of caution. Some words alter the equilibrium of a room. I wanted to ensure I was steady before reading it. When I finally opened it, Vanessa's handwriting filled several pages. She did not ask for money. She did not request reconciliation. She wrote to say she was sorry, that greed had dismantled everything she believed secure, that she had betrayed not only me, but herself. Therapy sessions, restitution efforts, retail work replacing conference rooms and tailored suits. She wrote that she did not recognize the woman she had become in those emails, that she wished she could return to the daughter her mother once believed her to be. She did not expect forgiveness. She only wanted acknowledgement. I read her letter 3 times. Then I stepped outside and watched the ocean for nearly an hour. Waves do not judge. They rise and fall without commentary. Eventually, I returned inside and wrote back. I thanked her for her honesty. I told her I did not hate her. I never had. Hatred requires sustained energy, and I had no desire to carry that weight. But trust once broken in that manner does not reassemble itself neatly. I wished her steadiness, growth, clarity. From a distance. Closure does not always feel dramatic. Sometimes it feels like placing a final period at the end of a sentence. I mailed the letter that afternoon and felt neither triumph nor regret, only completion. That evening, Alexander arrived. His visits had become regular, unforced. He no longer came solely out of concern. He came because he enjoyed being there. We grilled fish on the deck. Poured wine allowed silence to stretch comfortably between us. The sky shifted from blue to amber pelicans gliding low over the water. "Do you think she would approve?" he asked quietly, gaze fixed on the horizon. Of what? Of how it unfolded. I considered before answering. She would have wished it unnecessary, I said, but she valued accountability. So yes. He nodded slowly. You handled it with restraint. I handled it with clarity, I corrected gently. Restraint was a byproduct. He smiled faintly. We sat as the sun dipped lower light, spilling gold across the surface of the Pacific. Dad, he said after a while, setting his glass aside. There's something she told me. My pulse shifted subtly. A place he continued. She said when you were ready to say goodbye properly, you would know. She left something there. I already knew the answer before he spoke it. The bench, I said softly. By the Charles River. He nodded. She made me promise not to mention it until you had built something new. Until you weren't living in reaction anymore. I thought of the months since her passing. The choices made without anger. The mornings spent walking beside water that belonged to no one. The scholarship, the mentoring, the quiet redefinition of self. Maybe readiness does not arrive like a thunderclap. Maybe it accumulates quietly until you realize you are no longer afraid of what you will feel. When I asked, whenever you decide. I looked back toward the ocean, vast, patient, unending. Then I imagined the river in Boston, narrower, familiar, lined with trees that changed color with each season. Next week, I said, we'll go back. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Together. The sun slipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of crimson and violet behind. Night gathered gently without force. Later, after he had gone to bed, I remained outside alone for a while. The stars emerged one by one. The sound of waves against the rocks below formed a steady rhythm. Lorraine had always loved water in motion. Rivers, oceans, rain against windows. Water does not cling to form. It adapts, reshapes, moves forward. I finished my wine and set the glass aside. 3 months earlier, I had stood in a conference room feeling as though my chest might never fully expand again. Now, in a different state on a different coast, I felt something close to equilibrium. Not joy exactly, not absence of grief, but balance. The next morning, I walked the coastal path as usual. Fog clung low over the sea, thinning gradually as the sun climbed. A young couple jogged past, laughing. An older man walked a golden retriever that strained gently at its leash. Life did not pause for our private reckonings. It simply continued. When I returned home, Alexander was at the kitchen counter making coffee. He glanced up and smiled. "You look lighter," he said. "I am." We did not need to elaborate. Plans were made quietly over breakfast. Flights booked. A hotel reserved in Boston. No fanfare. I spent the rest of the day tending to the small garden beside the house. Trimming succulents. Rearranging stones. Tasks that required presence, but not heavy thought. In the evening, I pulled Lorraine's final letter from a drawer and read the postscript once more. The words were steady, unembellished. A simple instruction. There is something about returning to a place that once held you whole. It can either reopen wounds or close them. I suspected this would be the latter. That night, I stood once more on the deck as darkness settled over Monterey. The Pacific was a black expanse reflecting scattered points of light from distant boats. The air was cooler, sharper. I whispered a quiet acknowledgement into the wind, not a plea, not a request. Just recognition. "Thank you." Then I turned back toward the house. Next week, I would stand beside a river that had witnessed 22 years of Fridays. I would sit on a bench carved with initials weathered by time. I would read whatever message she had chosen to leave there, not as a man undone, but as a man who had endured chosen clarity and built something new. And somewhere between the Atlantic and the Pacific, between memory and motion, I would finally understand what it meant to say goodbye without losing love. 1 year. Exactly 1 year since Lorraine's last breath filled a hospital room and left it forever altered. Alexander and I stepped out of Logan Airport into a Boston morning that felt impossibly fresh. April had arrived with crisp air and a sky so brilliantly blue, it almost seemed staged, like the city itself had chosen this day carefully. The chill held the faint promise of warmth. Winter's grip had loosened, but spring had not yet settled fully into ease. It was that in-between moment, the same kind of space I had lived in for the past 12 months. Boston in April carries a particular clarity. The Charles River reflects the sky like polished glass. Brick buildings seem sharper in morning light. Cherry blossoms hover at the edge of bloom, fragile and temporary, their beauty intensified precisely because it will not last long. We walked toward the esplanade in quiet understanding. Alexander did not rush me. He did not fill the silence with distraction. He matched his stride to mine, hands tucked into his coat pockets, shoulders relaxed but attentive. The city stirred around us, joggers tracing the river's curve, cyclists gliding past the faint hum of traffic beyond the trees. When we reached the path, Lorraine and I had walked every Friday evening for 22 years. I felt something shift inside my chest. Not pain exactly, but recognition. Cherry trees lined the walkway, their branches heavy with pale pink blossoms just beginning to open fully. Petals loosened with each gentle breeze floating downward like deliberate confetti. They gathered along the pavement in soft drifts, coloring the ground in shades of blush and ivory. "There," I said quietly. The bench waited ahead, positioned exactly where river and skyline met in a perfect line of sight. Wooden slats worn smooth by decades of seasons. Metal arms cool beneath the morning air. I slowed several feet away. For a moment, I could not move closer. Alexander stopped beside me without comment. His presence felt steady, like a lighthouse beam that does not demand attention, yet remains constant. Every Friday I murmured more to myself than to him, no matter the weather. Rain, snow, humidity. This was ours. I remembered the routine vividly. We would leave work behind for a few hours, walk the familiar stretch of path, sit here as the sun slipped lower. Sometimes we talked about projects, dreams, frustrations. Sometimes we discussed nothing meaningful at all. And sometimes we said nothing, content simply to occupy the same silence. Those evenings had formed a rhythm as natural as breathing. I inhaled deeply and stepped forward. The bench felt smaller than I remembered, or perhaps I had changed. We sat side by side. The old carving was still visible beneath weather and time, LF plus LF, always together. The letters had softened at the edges, but remained legible. I traced them lightly with my fingertips, feeling grooves cut years ago by a pocket knife and youthful certainty. Dad Alexander said softly, his voice almost reverent, "There's something else." I looked closer. Beside the carving, mounted carefully and without ostentation, was a small brass plaque. The metal caught the morning light gently. I leaned in and read the inscription aloud, my voice unsteady. Even when apart, we walked together. Live fully, my love. L, beneath her initial, was a date. 1 week before she died. The air seemed to thin around me. When did this? I began, unable to finish the sentence. Alexander's eyes shone not with sorrow, but with tenderness. She called me 6 weeks before she passed, he said. She asked me to arrange it. She told me, when he comes back here, he needs to know I've released him. I don't want him waiting beside memory. I want him living. I swallowed. I had it installed 2 months ago, he continued. I wanted to make sure you were ready, that you weren't coming back to cling. You were coming back to close the circle. Cherry blossoms began to fall, more steadily stirred by a stronger breeze. Petals brushed against my coat, gathered along the bench, drifted across the river's surface like small boats without destination. One petal landed in my open palm. It was impossibly delicate, translucent at the edges, perfect in its impermanence. She's here, I whispered. Memory arrived with startling clarity. Lorraine sitting exactly where I sat now, spring sunlight catching in her dark hair. She had tilted her head back once, laughing as petals caught in her curls. This, she had said, squeezing my hand, is happiness. Not the future, not the past. This moment. I had not fully understood the weight of that statement then. I did now. I'm living, I said, quietly, addressing the river, the sky, the wind. I am. For both of us. From my jacket pocket, I removed white tulips, the same flowers she carried on our wedding day. I had searched 3 florists that morning to find them fresh and unblemished. I placed them gently at the base of the bench. Alexander's hand rested on my shoulder. We sat without speaking. Life unfolded around us without hesitation. A group of students passed, laughing loudly. A mother chased a toddler wobbling dangerously close to the path's edge. A couple jogged by in synchronized rhythm. An elderly man walked a golden retriever whose tail swayed with uncomplicated joy. The world had not paused during my grief. It had simply continued. Thank you for being here, I said. Always, Alexander replied. That's what family does. His words carried no bitterness, only certainty. Family isn't defined by lineage, I said slowly. It's defined by presence, by showing up. He nodded. The breeze shifted again, scattering petals in a brief spiral around us. They clung to my coat sleeve, to his shoulder, to the tulips resting below the plaque. Mom loved these trees, he said. She once told me they reminded her that beauty doesn't need permanence to have value. I closed my eyes briefly. She was right. Tears came, but they were not sharp or violent. They felt cleansing, like rain that clears dust from windows. We remained seated longer than necessary, allowing the moment to settle into something complete rather than unfinished. Eventually we rose. The path back toward the city felt different now. Not heavier, not lighter, simply integrated. We passed the small cafe Lorraine and I had frequented after nearly every Friday walk. Coffee, I asked. Alexander smiled immediately. She'd insist. Inside, warmth enveloped us. The scent of roasted beans mingled with baked bread. Nothing about the space had changed: the chalkboard menu, the mismatched chairs, the faint jazz playing from speakers near the counter. We ordered and found a corner table. As I wrapped my hands around the cup, I felt the quiet pleasure of heat seeping into my palms. "You know what surprises me," I said. "What I spent so much of our marriage afraid of losing her. Afraid that happiness might be temporary. And then it was. And yet, I'm still here." Alexander leaned back slightly, considering. "She prepared you," he said. "She did," I agreed. "Not for survival alone, for life after." Outside the window, petals swirled past like soft snow. "Love doesn't vanish," I continued. "It shifts. It becomes part of the air you breathe." He smiled. "I see it," he said, "in how you talk about her. It's not pain anymore, it's gratitude." That word felt accurate. We finished our coffee slowly, neither eager to rush the day. That evening, we met Maxwell and Allison for dinner. The restaurant buzzed with quiet conversation and clinking glasses. We shared stories not of confrontation or betrayal, but of Lorraine's humor, her stubbornness, her unexpected generosity. Laughter rose naturally. I realized that grief had changed texture. It was no longer a sharp edge. It was a smooth stone I could hold without cutting myself. The next morning, Alexander and I flew back to California. When we landed, the Pacific greeted us with its wide, untroubled expanse. Weeks passed. Monterey's mornings returned to their steady rhythm. Fog rolling in, sun breaking through, coffee warming my hands. Alexander visited again not long after our return, bringing his guitar. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he played a piece he had been composing. It was soft at first, tentative chords that felt like footsteps on gravel. Then it swelled into something expansive and hopeful. "What's it called?" I asked when he finished. "Renewal," he said. It fit. Allison called to inform me that the mentorship program had expanded. More men attending, more conversations happening. "Would you consider speaking at a conference this fall?" she asked. "Yes," I replied without hesitation. The idea of standing before others and sharing what I had learned no longer frightened me. If anything, it felt like a natural extension of survival. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a photograph sent by a friend in Boston. Cherry blossoms in full bloom along the Esplanade, the river reflecting pink and white like a watercolor painting. I set the image as my wallpaper. Not as an anchor to the past, but as a reminder that seasons return. Life here in Monterey settled into something quietly beautiful. Not dramatic, not extravagant, just steady. I tended to the small garden beside the house, adjusting stones, trimming plants. I volunteered twice a week. I read more than I had in years. Some evenings I stood on the deck, watching the Pacific absorb the sun's final light. Other evenings, Alexander played softly while we spoke of plans that did not revolve around loss. Grief did not disappear. It became a companion that walked beside me without dictating direction. People often say that time heals. I do not think time heals. I think clarity heals, acceptance heals, choice heals. 1 year after Lorraine's passing, I understood something simple and profound. Love had not ended with her life. It had changed shape. Clayton and Vanessa had attempted to dismantle the tangible structures of my world. Houses, businesses, accounts. They had failed to understand that the foundation beneath those structures had never been financial. It had been built over 22 years of partnership, of shared mornings, and Friday walks of quiet trust. That foundation could not be mortgaged. It could not be transferred. It could not be erased. Standing on my deck one morning, Pacific stretching wide before me, I whispered into the breeze, "Thank you. Not for the pain, not for the conflict, but for the years, for the strength forged quietly in hospital rooms and kitchen conversations, for Alexander, for the freedom to build again. The wind carried the words outward, dispersing them across water that did not cling. I turned back toward the house. There were dishes to wash, calls to return, a speech outlined to draft. Life waited. And this time I did not hesitate to step toward it. If you've listened to my journey from beginning to end, I want to share something important with you. This wasn't just my experience. This is a cautionary tale that could touch any of us when we least expect it. My family story began with hope, with genuine effort to build connections across bloodlines, with belief that love could transcend biology. For 22 years, I poured everything into relationships I thought were real, only to discover they'd been transactional all along. That realization almost broke me. But here's what I've learned. Sometimes God allows us to face betrayal, not to destroy us, but to reveal who truly stands beside us when everything crumbles. These grandpa stories, we carry the wisdom earned through pain, the lessons learned from being blindsided by those we trusted. They matter because they can protect others from making our mistakes. I'm sharing mine, hoping it reaches someone who needs to hear it before it's too late. Don't be like I was. Don't ignore the uncomfortable feelings when something doesn't add up. Don't silence your instincts because confrontation feels awkward or because you're afraid of being labeled difficult or suspicious. I dismissed countless red flags over the years. Clayton's gambling that I rationalized as occasional entertainment. Vanessa's vague explanations about her business practices, the way they'd appear only when they needed something, then vanish for months. I told myself that's just how busy modern families operate. I convinced myself that love meant giving people endless chances, never questioning, always trusting. But that wasn't love that was enabling. That was fear disguised as patience. My family story taught me that genuine relationships require reciprocity. They require people showing up not just during celebrations when cameras are present, but during chemotherapy appointments, during late-night hospital vigils, during ordinary Tuesday evenings when nothing special is happening except simply being present. Alexander understood this. He was thousands of miles away pursuing his music career. Yet he remained more connected to his mother and to me than Clayton and Vanessa ever were while living in the same city. Grandpa stories like mine reveal an uncomfortable truth. Family can be the source of our deepest wounds precisely because we trust them with access to our most vulnerable places. Clayton and Vanessa didn't just want money, they wanted everything, and they were willing to exploit their dying mother's name to get it. That level of calculated betrayal doesn't happen overnight. It builds gradually, testing boundaries, seeing what they can take without consequence. What saved me wasn't my own wisdom. I had none in those dark early days. What saved me was Lorraine's foresight and love. While I was being passive, she was being strategic. While I was trusting blindly, she was gathering evidence. While I thought I was honoring her by avoiding conflict with her children, she was building a fortress around me because she knew conflict was inevitable and I'd need protection. God works through people like Lorraine, like Alexander, like Maxwell Rhodes. He places protectors in our path, even when we don't recognize our need for protection. That's grace. That's provision we don't deserve but receive anyway. If you're watching this and thinking about your own family story, the relationships that drain you, the relatives who only call when they need something, the people who mistake your kindness for stupidity, I want you to hear this clearly. It's not disloyal to protect yourself. It's not unloving to enforce boundaries. It's not unchristian to say enough. Sometimes the most faithful thing we can do is trust that God sees what we're enduring and gives us permission to walk away from toxic grandpa stories that keep replaying the same painful patterns. So here's what I'm asking you. Have you experienced betrayal from someone who claimed to be family? Are you currently in a situation where you're being taken advantage of by people who should protect you? What warning signs did you ignore that you wish you'd confronted earlier? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your family story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today to find courage for their own situation. If this resonated with something you're experiencing, please share this video with someone who's struggling with similar family dynamics. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories about resilience, boundaries, and reclaiming your life from people who don't value you. Every share, every comment, every subscription tells me these grandpa stories matter and helps this message reach people who desperately need it. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for investing your time in my journey. I know these stories aren't always comfortable to hear. They force us to examine our own relationships and ask difficult questions about who deserves our trust and loyalty. But discomfort often precedes growth, and sometimes we need these mirrors held up to see our situations clearly. One final note before you go. The stories shared on this channel may contain dramatized elements designed for educational and reflective purposes. If this type of content doesn't serve your current needs, you're absolutely welcome to explore other videos that might resonate more helpfully with where you are right now. God bless each of you. Take care of yourselves. Remember, you deserve relationships built on mutual respect and genuine care, not obligation and exploitation. Don't settle for less.